Welcome back, my friends. Today I'm going to show you how to turn this photo into this photo using only or basically only the Radial Filter, which I consider the most powerful tool in all of Lightroom. I know you've heard of it, I know you probably use it all the time, but I don't think everyone understands how much you can do with just this one tool, how much you can mold the light and shape an image, all the different ways to color grade and use luminosity masks. There's so much you can do with just this one Radial Filter tool. And yeah, that's enough out of me. Let's get to it. So of course we need to begin in Lightroom, and the only changes I'm going to make that don't use radial filters is set what I call my base exposure. I never start editing a photo until I have the exposure balanced the way I want it to be balanced. And what I mean by that is right now my highlights are too bright, my shadows are too dark. I want to even that out a bit. And then I'm going to use radials to bring your attention to the parts of the image I want your attention. Our eyes are drawn to contrast. Contrast can come as color, it can come as brightness, it can come as clarity. If something's soft versus sharp, there will be contrast there. If it's bright versus dark, there will be contrast there. So anyway, I'm rambling. Let's start by balancing our exposure. We're just going to bring the highlights down, and I'm going to bring them, I think, all the way down. No, not quite. About there. This is to taste, guys. There isn't a reason I went with 60, except I thought that looked good to start. And then I'm going to bring my shadows up a bit. Well, you know, I thought I was, but it's not having the impact I want. What I really need to do is increase the exposure. And I'm now looking at the foreground. I'm ignoring the sky for now. And now I'm going to go back to the highlights and bring that down a bit further. And this is where I'm going to start. This is still too bright for me, and even the foreground is too bright for me, but this is going to be a decent starting point. So now from here on out, I'm going to try to do everything with just radial filters, demonstrating how powerful they are in shaping light. That's really what makes them so good. So let's start with my intention. I want to create a bridge from the sun to our gazer, to Sophie here. I want your attention drawn to this interaction between those two, and the sunlight's interaction with these mounds to be secondary, but I want that in the image as well. And I'm going to show you how I do that. First thing I want to do is draw your eyes away from what I would call this negative space that sort of envelops this area down here. There's a lot of extra space on this side and on this bottom, but I think it's necessary for the frame. I'm going to click and drag and create a nice big radial filter that sort of follows the path that I want your gaze. So I don't need your attention in these sections that I just described, but I do want it in this area. So let's make that pretty broad. It's going to have a nice big feather on it. So first, quick tip, you can hit the hotkey O, or you can go down and click or unclick this box. That shows you what you'll be affecting with your radial filter. So that's a helpful thing. If you're not sure whether you're affecting the inside or the outside or what's quite falling into the range, hotkey O will show you what you're affecting with these radial filters. Another quick tip before we get too far past it. The show edit pins, you might want to make sure that this is set to auto. And the reason is if you have it set to always, then if you're trying to look at how your image looks without the pins, there's all this overlay that's kind of distracting. And if you have it set to never selected, then you can't edit the pins. Auto is just the best because if your mouse is over here on the sides, those pins disappear and you can see how your image looks. And if it's over top, it will show you all of them so you can go back and edit them. I'll show you that as an example. Let's say that I went out of the tool and I wanted to go back and edit the radial filter that I just created. If I go into the radial filter tool again, you can see that pin pop up. I can click on that and then I can make my changes. So I think most of you probably are at least that far already. Nothing too revolutionary there. So back to what I'm trying to do here. It's create a vignette effect and focus your attention in this middle stretch. I'm going to do that by just lowering the exposure. Whoops. Now I need to invert the selection because it's affecting the middle. If I hit O, it's affecting everything within the radial filter. I want to affect everything outside of the radial filter. So I hit the invert box down here and turn off my mask so we can see what it's doing. And now if I bring that exposure down, that's having the impact I want. I'm going to bring this up a little bit. It's not hitting this corner quite as much as I want. And I'm just literally clicking and dragging within the radial filter to move it. If I need to make the selection longer or wider and like that, you can just grab these pins and you can expand or detract. So that should be pretty easy to understand. And I'm kind of just putting this where I think it looks nice. And there's no rule here. I'm sort of just eyeballing it. That looks about right to me. Alright, the other thing I'm noticing is I don't like that this section of sky is so bright comparatively. So what I'm actually going to do is drag this much smaller, get it to about here, and I'm sort of going to drag and pull something more like that. I want this corner to be dark as well. So it's just this area here that I want to leave well lit. And that looks a bit better to me already. Now I'm going to create that bridge using the opposite idea. Rather than affecting everything outside of it, I'm going to affect everything within the radial filter. So click and drag, create another one, sort of go sunshine to Sophie. I'm actually going to go to the corner of the sun because it's so bright already. And I'm going to sort of drag well beyond her because I think it will look more natural if that light extends all the way through the scene. So did that, increase the whites. Actually, let's increase the exposure. Both would have a similar impact, but this won't affect the bright sunlight quite as much. Sort of adjust that angle there. And I'm going to go too far to show you something you can do. Actually, no, it's working pretty well. I don't have to go too far. I'm also going to increase the temperature. I want this sunlight to be warm, and I want it to look like a spotlight, like she's on stage being just spotlit by the sun. So a nice warm glow kind of going through. Let's increase the feathering a bit. Feathering is how hard a line you have versus how gradual the impact is from the corner. So if I turn the feathering all the way off, you're going to see a very hard line, which is not natural at all. If I go too heavy though, it's almost too subtle an effect. I find that 50 to 75 range usually works best, but there are times where I would go all the way up to 100. So that's already got the effect I want. It's nowhere near perfect, but it's got this idea that now our focus is automatically set to the central part here. I don't like that this looks a bit hazy and kind of dull. So I'm going to use another radial filter. I'm going to click and drag over just a stretch here, and I'm just going to bring the blacks down a bit. And that will make the darkest parts of that section darker without like overly affecting the snow. In fact, a lot of the times, almost every time what I do is I up the whites a bit and mute the blacks and sort of create some contrast in there. I'm also going to bring the temperature down in this section because it just looks a bit unnaturally warm compared to everything else. So the first thing I notice is she's way too dark amongst everything else in here. Let's use a radial filter, of course, and we're going to click and drag a small selection around her. I'm actually going to make that a bit bigger, and I'll show you why in a second. If I increase just the exposure here, you can see that it's not very natural looking. There's an aura to her, a halo that's not what we're going for at all. This is where I'm going to use the range mask. So the range mask, if you go down here, defaults to off, but it has two options, color and luminance. We can tell it what to affect within our radial filter based on either how bright it is, which would be luminance, or how dark it is, or by what color it is that we want to impact. So now I'm going to zoom in, and I'm going to turn that range mask to color. I'm going to use this dropper tool to tell it what color I want to select, so I'm just going to click that red, and it's only now going to impact the red. So you can see it no longer has that halo around her. Drop that back in there, and if I keep increasing the exposure, you can see it's mostly impacting the reds here. It's bleeding in a bit to this grass here, which is kind of interesting because that's not red at all. We can fix that in a couple ways. One is we could try the tolerance. So right now it's affecting red and everything along this red spectrum. If we make it very intolerant, it will only affect the exact red, but that's not very natural. If I kind of go somewhere in between here, that looks about right. It's no longer affecting the grass. So that's probably the easiest thing to do in that case. I'm going to keep bringing this up though. Yeah, I think that's the easiest way to impact it. Now on this note, we wouldn't necessarily need to do this. I like the red. I'm going to saturate that color a bit more because it kind of is shifted towards white a bit, boosting the exposure so much. And pop the whites. Yeah, there we go. Bring it, give it a bit of vibrance. So let's say that you wanted that to be a purple jacket or a blue jacket or an aqua jacket. Because we've selected the color red just within here, we can now impact that color by adjusting the hue. So I can actually bring this to a green jacket, to a yellow jacket, to an aqua jacket. It will look as natural. Like we're going to have to definitely increase the tolerance to make that blend a bit better and find like sort of the sweet spot in there where it doesn't look, I don't know, it's got some interesting noise going on. What we could do in this case is bring that tolerance all the way up so that it's a bit more natural. Now that lime green is just an unnatural color anyway. Let's find something that maybe is a bit more realistic. Let's say we want to give her an orange jacket. I'm going to bring the saturation down a little bit so it's not quite so neon. Because we brought that tolerance up, you can see it's affecting all the area around her. The thing we can do with a radial filter is we have this brush option in here. Now it's different from the brush tool. So we have a graduated, a radial, and a brush tool. We don't want to use the brush tool. We want to use the brush feature within the radial options. So if we click on brush, we could actually make that same change to any other part of our image by just brushing it, using it as a brush. Or we can undo an area that's being affected in our radial, which is what I'm going to do in this case. I'm going to hold the Alt or Option key, and it's going to turn to a negative symbol. I'm going to click on Auto Mask, which will it'll try to detect what area we're actually trying to impact and what we're not trying to impact. Basically, it's going to help us paint within the lines. And I'm going to turn that flow up a bit. Just for the sake of seeing visualization, I'm going to turn the mask overlay on so you can see what's being impacted. I'm going to zoom in a lot tighter. So holding the O key, I'm just going to start brushing out that bit that we don't want to impact. And it does a pretty good job with the auto mask on of not bleeding into Sophie, which we do want to impact, and just brushing out this part on the outside. So let's every now and then I like to release that key so that if I ever need to undo, I can just undo the last thing I did. If I went a bit heavy-handed with the brush strokes, I like to be able to undo. So every now and then I just release the key and then press it again and come back to it. Hope that makes sense. A lot of the stuff I've been doing for so many years that it's semi-autopilot, so I apologize if I go too fast or if I'm using terms or something like that you don't quite understand. It's really hard for me to remember what was comprehensible at the very beginning, so hopefully I'm not doing that too much to you. But there, now we have a selection that's basically only her. If I turn off that mask overlay, we can see we've just changed the color of her jacket to orange. We can keep doing that through pretty much the entire color spectrum. And some will look less natural than others, so you'll really have to fine-tune that. So all that to say, this is how powerful the luminosity mask could be. We can make the sun red if we wanted to. We could make the jacket green if we wanted to. I don't want to do any of that in this case. I'm actually going to just delete that because I think it was unnecessary. I'm going to make a tighter selection in the first place around her, and I'm going to increase the shadows and the exposure, and I'm going to bring that up to a point that looks pretty natural, and then I'm going to use that brush concept because that worked pretty well last time, and I'm just going to brush in kind of around her so that there isn't that halo. That halo is one of the giveaways that somebody's using like an HDR software or has pushed their shadows too much. So that looks pretty natural to me. Let's zoom out. And so far, this is already our before and after. We've done this with just radial filters already. The next thing I want to do, I'm going to create another radial back here. The area that stretches beyond, kind of back behind her, I want to create some contrast there. My favorite way to do that is boosting whites, lowering blacks. And I just do it based on visual. Like I don't have a set rule on how much I push and pull. I just like the way that it makes the snow bright and the other parts dark and creates contrast. I do this with a lot of images. I'm going to actually just do this all over the place. I'm going to do a similar radial filter kind of through here. I'm going to bring those blacks down. I want certain parts to pop and the other parts to be subdued. And I don't know if it's, let's see, I'm going to go back and show you what just those two radials did even there. If I go back to, I think it was here, yeah, you can see the difference. And it's a very cool way of creating contrast in my opinion. In fact, I'm liking it so much. Let's do another one up in this stretch. Probably could have done one all the way across, but you know, such is life. Let's do it about there and bring down the blacks and bring up the whites. There. I really like the way that that's sort of forcing my attention to just this stretch. I think that looks great. The other thing I'm noticing, this part of the mountain is dark, but this part is bright, and that seems a bit unusual, like unnatural to me. So I'm just going to kind of put one here at these mountains in the distance. They should be a bit darker. So bring the highlights down on just that stretch. And I'm going to let it bleed into the clouds in this case because I think that also looks better having those brought down. I'm going to also increase the contrast of that section. And there. The distant mountain shouldn't be as bright as this part of our foreground. That didn't look right to me. I'm also noticing that this one little stretch looks warmer than the rest, which is a bit unusual. So bring down the temperature of just that section. Not by much, but let's see, I'm going to try bringing down the saturation a little bit as well. And you know, I could probably mess with this for a long time, but I think you guys probably get the idea of all the things you can do with radial filters. I'm going to go into the tool and show you one other thing you could do. Let's use her jacket. Actually, you know what? Let's use the sun this time as an example. I'm going to make a radial over the sun. Let's say I want to make a red sun, you know, which would look strange, but I've decided I'm going to be artistic with my vision, and I'm going to make a red sun. I'm going to go to the range mask and go to, I could do this with color or luminance in this case, because the yellow is a very different luminance than, say, the dark cloud. But I think color makes more sense than luminance. Let's go and use our eyedropper sort of on that whitish yellow there. And if you want to do two colors, which I do in this case, if you hold the shift key, you can click another part and it will use both those colors as sample points. I could do one in the blue section as well. If I wanted to affect a wider color range, I can keep using this dropper, holding the shift key to make more selections. I think you're limited to 4. When you're done, you just drop it back in that circle. I am going to undo that though, because I don't think I needed all those sample points. Let's pick that back up. Yeah, just that one's fine, and maybe that one. So there's a little box here that everybody forgets about. If you click on that, you actually get the entire color spectrum to work with. And I can change just this color to whatever I want in a more, I don't know, visual way than the hue adjustment. So let's say I want to make it a red sun. I'm going to start here. And you can adjust the saturation. If that's too red, I can bring that down and make it a bit more subtle and just give it like a red tinge and kind of keep creeping down until I think it looks all right. Yeah, there we go. It's a very subtle one at this point, or I can go really dramatic and push that saturation. Now, obviously, it doesn't look very natural there. Part of that is because of our tolerance, so I might have to bring that up a bit. Well, most of it doesn't look natural because it's just way too aggressive of a red. Let's bring that red shade down to about, I think, 15. And that'll just sort of give it more of a red pop than anything else. I think that's kind of it. The last thing I will do, because I do this often in images, I do what I like a personal vignette. I just click and drag kind of along so it's mostly affecting the top and bottom of the image, invert it, and then I bring the exposure way down. This gives a ton of drama, which most people find too heavy-handed. I like it, just my style. I really think it looks cool to have the sky, you know, really dark. Yeah, I like that deep blue in my sky. Again, this is so much to taste. I'm not suggesting you do this, but I love the effect that it has, just taking our eyes completely away from the sky in the foreground here and bringing all of our attention to just this stretch. I also like the deep blues more than the bright blues for the sky. If I go back, it might take me a second to find that exact radial. I've got so many here now. I might also play with the, I'm going to lower the temperature. I like warm centers and cold boundaries. That's, again, another idea of contrast is colors. So if you have blues to oranges, will gravitate towards the warmer parts of the image. Along those same lines, I might lower the texture and the clarity a bit on the outsides and really soften the outside so that the sharpest part of our image is all through here. And to sort of complement that effect, maybe I will find a radial that stretches through here like that one, and I'll boost the clarity so that the clearest part of our image is through the middle. Now again, that might be way too heavy-handed for you, but that's okay. You're going to do this to taste, but just notice that using only radial filters and being very selective with where we want people to pay attention, we can do that by using different selections. We can do these long stretches that kind of create a bridge or a visual pathway through our image, or we could do a small localized one to just bring out a certain feature. Maybe I like just a section of glow here, so I can make a pretty broad selection over there, and I can warm it up and accentuate that what's already occurring there. Or if I thought that was distracting, because in this case I think it is, I'm going to actually cool that contrast down a lot because it's pulling me away from where I want to be, which is this engagement, and it's pulling me to the side of my image. So I'm going to lower the brightness and the temperature, and I'm basically going to just lower the contrast in all sorts of ways so that we don't quite pay as much attention to that section over there. And that did a pretty good job. It's still maybe even a bit too bright and contrasty in just this part. I would go into Photoshop most likely if I was actually going to print this and really put time into it. I would make that kind of go away, so to speak. But in this case, I'm just going to darken it, way too much probably, but I want to keep you here. So at this point, guys, I'm kind of waffling. I've already sort of, I think, demonstrated all the ways you can use a radial filter, and I'm kind of just completing the image for my own sake. I'm gonna leave you here. I think you've hopefully picked up a lot of tips and tricks. If you have questions, let me know. There's going to be a ton of use of radial filters in my workflow series where I just edit a photo for you guys, but I wanted to actually spend time really going through this tool and showing you all these features that you probably didn't even realize existed. So I apologize that got a bit long, guys. Brevity's not my strong suit. I want you to know I would never actually process a photo with only radial filters. The idea of this was to show you just how much you can do. And with that in mind, I'm reaching out to you at this point. I want to know who you are. What do you need? What would you like to see from me? Because I'm making videos just based on what I think might be useful, but maybe they're not. Tell me who you are in the comments, or send me a message on Instagram or Facebook. Say that you're advanced, that you want more behind the scenes stuff, or maybe you want more out in the field. Maybe you want more tips and tricks like this on just individual tools, or maybe you just want to see my workflow over and over again. See how I process 100 different photos so you can start to develop some of your own techniques. I don't know, and I would love to hear from you about that. So leave it in the comments, send me a message, hit subscribe if you like it, and thank you for your help. I'll catch you on the next one.